So yes, thanks once again for coming. Just a few quick announcements. Big Data Day again, July 9th. On your calendars, we have 80 plus submissions already, so it's going to be a pretty great day. Probably 50 plus talks. Lots of great keynote speakers. We have Will Albaz from Factual, who's the creator of applied semantics. We're familiar with Google AdSense, that's the precursor to that. From Yahoo, we have a VP, we have Netflix VP, Toyota Motor North America, Chief Data Officer from there, from Claremont Graduate University. It's there on the website, just data.com is go there, so you'll see a lot of the information. Again, completely free, please sign up and put on your calendars. Other than that, we're probably going to have our next meetup probably towards the end of May, just before Memorial Day, send out information about that. That's also going to be pretty interesting. So with that, I'm handing off to Aaron Williams, who's from Mesosphere, and talk about the new DCOS, which I think is pretty awesome piece of software.
Let me test this other mic.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so hang on 1 second. Test. That working? Give me 1 second. Just test.
There you go. Hey. Gain.
All right. So.
Much so, yeah. All right. How's everybody doing, man? Good. All right. So I had a chance to talk to a lot of you before we got started, but this is going to be extra awesome if you guys raise your hands, ask questions, jump in, don't be shy. Okay. So if you have any questions, I may tell you I'm going to talk about it later, and that's okay. But I don't mind going off in tangents as well. Some things I might tell you, hey, let's hold that off until afterwards when I have a beer in my hand. And trust me, you'll want that if I say that. So, but otherwise, don't be shy. So, this was the title that was in the abstract, and I'm surprised this title brought so many people here, frankly. It's a bit of a mouthful. The reason this title is so long is because we actually made this up before we had a big announcement. So last week, we made a big announcement with a community of about 60 different companies where we were open sourcing this data center operating system thing. Well, I couldn't put in the title that we were going to be doing this because it was kind of a big secret. So we came up with this terrible title instead. I can't take any credit for this terrible title. But this is really what I wanted to tell you. This is an intro to the data center operating system and this new open source project. And trust me, we're going to cover everything that was in the abstract, so it's not like I'm doing a bait and switch. But I think you're going to find that the fact that we're talking about this open source project is actually much more interesting than some of maybe the content that was in that abstract. So hold me to it, though. If there was anything in the abstract you were like, but I came here just for that one sentence, don't be shy. I'll be happy to go into those details as well. All right? Okay, so quick intro for me. I'm Aaron Williams. I work at Mesosphere. Who's heard of Mesosphere? Most everybody? Okay, that's good. That's good. It's not always true, by the way. I joined Mesosphere about 9 months ago. I lead up their advocacy efforts. So part of what I do is coming out and meeting with the community like yourselves. The other part of what I do is I work with our open source community. So that's where this other project comes into play. Really, this DCOS thing is kind of the perfect combination of those two things. My icon's at the bottom. I'm a Buckeye. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and I love the Buckeyes. So the fact that there's so many of them being drafted right now in the NFL is such great news. I spent 5 years at Sun working on Java when it was Java 1.0. I spent 5 years at SAP helping them build an ecosystem as well. So I spent time at big giant companies, enough time certainly to realize I don't like being in big giant companies. So I've also started 2 companies of my own, and this is my 3rd startup now with Mesosphere. So that's my experience. Now, so I'm sure there are some of you thinking, wait a minute, this guy's not a big data guy. It's true, I'm not a big data guy. So I'll just lay that on the table at the outset. What I'm going to be talking about tonight, though, actually isn't necessarily just big data. This is actually talking about the future of the data center, where we're headed with the data center. And big data plays a really important role in where we're headed, but I don't think it's the only piece of the story. So I just want to put that caveat out there at the beginning. You guys are far bigger experts with big data than I ever will be. I love to start with this quote, and Satya is not the only one that's ever said it. I just think Satya is kind of a cool, smart CEO guy. So I use his quote. But the idea is software is eating the world, and every company is becoming a software company. What does that mean? It means that companies aren't competing just on the quality of their products anymore. They're actually competing on the quality of their software and the ability of their software to be better than their competitors' software. And that's completely disrupting all different kinds of industries. Now, there are some really obvious examples like Netflix, of course, completely disrupting the way we view television. And Airbnb, for instance, completely disrupting the way we look at overnight stays. But you go to talk to any Fortune 1000 company, and they will tell you that software has become a differentiator for them in their business. And I like to put this quote up first because this is what drives me to get excited about this space. Data centers and blinking lights, maybe not the most exciting topic, certainly not the most exciting topic when I think about the other kinds of things that are out there in the press. But when I think about how that software actually enables companies to compete, that's when it gets exciting. And I'm going to weave this through the whole presentation. We're going to come back to this thought of how does this new data center that I'm defining actually help these companies be more competitive. And that's part of the whole story. Okay, so where does DCOS start? DCOS, Data Center Operating System. If anybody says DCOS, I will slap them. So it's not DCOS. It's one of the reasons we put the slash in there. We want people to say DCOS. So where did it all come from? Well, let's do a little quick history lesson. And I imagine most of the people in this room already know this, so it's probably don't have to spend too much time on it. But we went from mainframe. We got all the way up to virtual. That's great. Then we started putting containers inside virtual machines. And all of a sudden, things started to get a little out of control, a little hard to manage. So what Mesosphere did when we started about 3 years ago was say, let's go the other direction. Let's turn this back into one giant pool of resources. Sure, inside that giant pool of resources, there are a bunch of computers, virtual machines, pointing lights. Could be in a cloud, could be on-prem, who knows, don't care. What I do care about is the fact that I have a giant set of resources that I can run my applications in, and that's really where DCOS came into play. And we created this as a product about 3 years ago by combining a bunch of open source software with a little bit of proprietary software. So it was about 25 open source packages that we combined together. I'll go through a few of them in a second. With some proprietary software. We bundled it all together, made it easy to install, made it easy for our customers to manage as a single distribution, as opposed to having to go, and install and manage each of them individually. Great, huge success. I came on board about 9 months ago. I went and met with as many users of Mesos as I could. So these were guys like Apple and Twitter, Airbnb, big companies, and some small ones as well that were doing some really innovative things. Cisco, another good example, with their Mantle product. So the thing that surprised me was how often these companies had taken Mesos as their base and started to build their own stack on top of it, and how often those stacks looked a hell of a lot alike. But they were just off by enough to make it so that there wasn't really any interoperability between what they were doing. There was no way for one engineer or one application that was being developed in one company to easily be portable over to another stack being developed by another company. And frankly, they were spending a lot of time inventing those individual wheels. So what we said was, and this was sort of my push when I first joined, let's fix this. It turns out that the individual open source projects that we have value individually. You can still get great value if you just want to go run Mesos. But the actual combining of them, the turning it into a distribution has value as well. And we should get everybody together to focus on a single thought around what that distribution should be. What packages should be inside there? How should you install it? How do these things work together? And so that's where the open source decision came from. We teased apart our product. We said, let's take all the open source packages, put them together into one org inside GitHub so it's easy to see what those things are. Take our proprietary stuff, tease it out, continue to have it available so that we can sell it to customers who will now run that on top of the open source product. We're still an enterprise software company. We're still selling enterprise software licenses. All of our customers are still Fortune 1000 customers. So nothing changed about Mesosphere's business. But what changed was now we could actually go and have an intelligent conversation with Cisco and with Apple and with Twitter about what the future of the data center looked like, because we laid it all out there. We said, hey, what do you think? Come join us and help us make this better, as opposed to individually going and building it. And that's where we get the launch. And I thought this would look awesome with this giant screen. I'm a SpaceX guy too. So, so that's where we launched last week. We came together, 60 companies, and created this thing called DCOS. And now it's completely open source, available on GitHub, DCOS.io. I'm going to show you the site in a minute so you can see kind of the resources that we put together as a community for this project. And so what does DCOS enable then? Well, of course it enables these containers, this idea of containers. That's kind of a no-brainer. Everybody knows that. But we also want to talk about how microservices play into that as well. We believe in a future of microservices in containers. We look at how modern apps are being built, and we say the more we can do to put these microservices into individual containers and let teams go off and develop on their own these individual microservices, the better off we are. We have great examples of it, and I'll show you one in just a second. But that's insufficient. It's not good enough just to have a set of containers with microservices. And this is where I'm sure you guys will all say, oh, duh, because big data and analytics play a really important role in this. And so when we talk to companies that are looking at other technologies, Kubernetes, for instance, or even looking at Docker, some of their Docker data center type things, it's great. They do as good a job at understanding the left side of this picture as we do. But the problem is, there's a lot more to it. If you want to have a modern app, it's not good enough. It's not just about putting your app, breaking it down into these microservices and containers. You also need the ability to run this big data and not have to manage it in two separate data centers, not have to manage it in two separate ways. And that's where we believe this data center operating system comes into play. And of course, the kernel of the operating system, if I can extend that metaphor a little bit further, is Mesos. So Mesos is the one that's doing all the hard work of taking all these resources, pulling them all together, turning it into a single logical pool of resources that we can run applications in. But then there's a bunch of other things that you need if you want to actually get these things running. You need things like Marathon that are going to take and run your containers and keep them running for a long time. You need things like Chronos that are going to do things like batch jobs. I'm going to show you a layer diagram in a second that sort of goes through what we think the different pieces are that you need to really be able to run these modern apps inside a data center. But this is what got us really excited. And so we started showing this around to those companies. We said, hey, what do you think? Does this fit with where you think things are going? And we got a lot of yeses. So then we said, okay, great. What goes in that purple box then? What are the pieces that we need to be able to solve that problem? We ended up with about 35 open source projects that now live under this umbrella of DCOS. And those 35 projects continue to run independently. It's not as though we're somehow taking them over. All we're doing is saying, we take these 35 projects, we pool them together, we create a distribution out of them, and turn it into something that's easy to install and easy to use. And that then enables this future with these modern apps. And if we do it right, it's not even just about sort of helping companies with portability. It's not just about things below the line. It's also about building this ecosystem of solutions that run on top of the line. So I'm going to show you when I show the demo, I'm going to show you some of the solutions that are already available for a one-click install. You can also do a one-command line install to get things like Spark and Kafka, Cassandra, Hadoop up and running inside your data center. You don't have to manage where it's running. You don't have to manage it across hundreds of nodes, maybe inside your cluster. With one command, you just get it up and running, and then you run your containers off beside it and use those services inside the data center. So we're working with all the major companies that are creating these frameworks to get them running inside this open ecosystem. Now, think back to what I said at the very beginning, Satya's quote, right? The more time we get, the less time people have to spend focused on doing this crap, the more time they can spend focused on doing this crap. And that's what we're really focused on. So when we go in then to talk to these potential customers, we go in to talk to the users of this system, that's really our pitch to them. Let's stop having you have to spend all your time reinventing that wheel. Let's get the community to come together and help do that. And same thing for this ecosystem of frameworks. You want to sell a framework on top of this open source project? Fantastic. Guess what? That's what Mesosphere does. We sell our product on top of the open source platform. And that's what we want a lot of companies to do. So it's not even a question of just being all open source or just being all proprietary. We want to have that good mix. We want to have the best possible set of solutions running on top of each other. So now, I've got a slide that goes through some layers. Now, every time I go through this slide, somebody says, that's wrong. I think of the layers like this. And I say, yes, of course you do. That's okay, great, I'm glad. This is primarily for people that haven't really thought about what the pieces are that go into this data center operating system, or what you need to be able to run those modern apps that I was talking about. So if you have a different way of thinking about it, that's great. I'm just going to show you the way that we think about it sometimes to help us in terms of this conversation, okay? So, no pitchforks. So at the bottom is our machines, right? Okay, no surprise there. You got to have hardware somewhere, believe it or not. How do you provision those machines? Well, a lot of solutions for doing that. So, you know, a lot of those folks are actual partners working with us in the project. So that's great. So you got to provision the hardware. How do you manage the resources? We think Mesos is the right way to do that. So now that you've got your 100 nodes, they've all got Linux installed on them. They've all your favorite flavor of Linux installed on them. They've all got, you know, the core of DCOS running on them. Now you're ready to actually manage all those resources, manage all those computers. Okay, great. Now you're ready to containerize your application. There's lots of different technologies for that as well. For those of you that don't know, Docker didn't invent containerization. They made it very popular though, and we love that. So we use their containerized formats, their file formats. We use all that inside DCOS. It's great. If you're familiar with running Docker commands, you'll be very familiar with how to actually get applications, containerized applications running on DCOS, and I'll show you that in a bit. Okay, great. So now you need something that does short running jobs. These are, you know, things like batch jobs, cron jobs. Great. You need technologies for doing that, and you need technologies for managing things over the long haul as well. How do you actually keep these containers up and running? How do you ensure that when something goes down, it comes back up? And then last but not least, how do you actually manage the applications that go into those containers then so that they're ready to run inside the data center? Okay, so when we put blocks around those middle pieces, those are the things that we see belonging inside DCOS. And those are where the 35 different packages live, is inside sort of these layers of the stack. We work with hardware and OS, Linux OS vendors down on this end. We work with all kinds of application vendors on the top end. But everything inside there, we think, should have some level, we should be able to come together and decide on how those things work together and what the best way is. And of course, it should be pluggable. So it's not as though we're saying you have to use one container orchestrator. So we love Marathon because it's used in production in very large companies, so we love it. But if you're a Kubernetes guy, no problem. We have a Kubernetes framework that runs on top of DCOS, and that's really where the power of something like DCOS comes in. We want this to be an OS that you can actually build on top of, and then you can actually reconfigure for your purposes. So if it's truly an OS, then that puts us in a position where over time, you're not having to pick the winner. You're not having to invest all your time and energy in a single technology that's going to be the winner. We have companies that run 30 different frameworks on top of DCOS because they've got different parts of their organization that are running different things in different ways. But because they're running it all on DCOS, guess what? They get massive savings in terms of how it's run because we orchestrate that across all the resources in their data center. And I'll show you, like I said, I'll show you an example of how what the kind of results that Autodesk got by instituting DCOS in a very similar way. They had a ton of very disparate kinds of workload that they were running, and they wanted to see how a product like DCOS could help them make that more efficient. Okay, so layers. Make sense? Nobody threw any pitchforks? That's great. Fantastic. Okay, too easy. Okay, so a quick sort of philosophical recap on what DCOS is, and then I promise I'll show you some really beautiful slides and I'll type into a terminal. So DCOS is 100% open source. It's ASL2. Everything about it is ASL2. All 35 projects are ASL2, so it's very easy. It's inside GitHub. You can't miss it. It's the big diverse community, I think, is really important to this too. When we started, we thought maybe we'll get 10, 20 different companies to come join us. We ended up with 60, and we ended up with them across a really interesting set of companies. So we ended up with a bunch of companies that were doing clouds. We ended up with a bunch of companies that were building on top. We ended up with a bunch of companies that were actually implementing this stuff. So like Yelp and Uber and Twitter, these guys came and joined the project to help us make this great. And we ended up with a bunch of systems integrators. So like Accenture is there talking about how great it is for them to be able to go out to their customers and say, now I've got a sort of a single technology that you don't necessarily have to place a big bet on. So 100% open source. Next, umbrella. So we're producing roadmaps and designs for this project. So it's not like we're just kind of tossing this over the wall and saying, hey, have fun. We're actually talking about where we want this thing to go. If you go out to the website and you look at the documentation, you can see the roadmap for this project, what the next things we're going to be working on. We've already produced a bunch of design documents as a community to say, here's where we think this is going kind of more specifically. So if you say, boy, I've got all this spare time, I'd really like to come and help commit some code to this project, fantastic. I can point you to the things that we're working on right now, and I can show you how you can come help and get involved. One of the best ways, frankly, though, is to say, you know what, I've got this framework that I love. I'd love to get it running on top of DCOS. If you have that, if you find yourself in that position, please come talk to me or talk to my company, because we'd love to help you get those frameworks into the universe so that everybody can take advantage of it. All right. One interesting thing that we hadn't open sourced in the past, it wasn't part of those original 20 open source projects, is the build toolchain. These are all the tools that we use for turning these 30 projects into a distribution that you can actually install. So that's now all open source as well. That's one of the sort of value adds of having this all out in the open source. So this means now we're super excited about all the crazy places people are going to get DCOS up and running. Nobody's done the Apple Watch yet, but somebody in here could be the one that gets DCOS up and running in an Apple Watch. So take a look at that as well, because we worked with 4 or 5 cloud providers. We worked with a bunch of Canonical and a bunch of folks to get it running on a bunch of different flavors of Linux. But if you say, hey, my favorite world isn't there, don't be shy. We want people to come in and help actually put this into as many environments as possible. This is not limited in any way. A lot of people were worried when we first put this out. They said, yeah, this is just Mesosphere putting out a thing that's all crippled, so it's not going to actually work, and then I'm going to get really frustrated, or I'm going to get this in my data center, and then they're going to hold me ransom. Not true. Microsoft, these guys would not have signed up to be part of this project if that was the case, because guess what? They're not going to see a dime off that if that was the case. So this is not limited in any way. You can use this on a Vagrant in your laptop. You can use this to run a 10,000 node cluster in production. We don't have anybody doing that yet, but we will, I'm sure. So don't be shy. And last but not least, we wanted this to be very familiar. So as I said before, if you're familiar with Docker, if you're familiar with some of these technologies, even if you're just familiar with Mesos and you kind of understand what it does, taking a look at DCOS as a way to make that whole process of getting it up and running in a large cluster easier, I think you'll find this to be one of the easiest ways to do it. So I love this slide just because it's got so many pictures on it. But the thing was, sort of, these are the companies that were involved in launching it. I like to thank them, frankly, every place I go, just because they spend a lot of time and energy to make this project work. It's not just Mesosphere. I get to stand up and talk to you about how great it is, but these guys put a lot of time and energy in making it. And as I said, you'll see it's a pretty diverse group. It's not all one or the other kind of. I'm going to share all these slides later, by the way, so if anybody, you can take pictures if you want, but if you just want to look at the slides later, you'll have. All right, let's talk about an example, and then I promise I'll get to an actual running cluster. Autodesk, they put out a white paper. We gave them early access to DCOS, the open source version, and they actually got it up and running inside their cluster, inside their data center, and they did some benchmarks, and they ran some A/B tests against what their old architecture was. And the numbers are pretty startling. I think the biggest reason for this was because of as I said before, the disparate number of data centers that they used to have to run in order to run the different kinds of applications that they needed across their entire company. Bringing them all together into a single infrastructure, a single unified infrastructure, made their lives a hell of a lot easier. And then sort of that whole ease of use, and you'll see that when I go into the actual demo. For them, it was fantastic. They had a handful of frameworks that they'd been dying to test, but guess what? Just didn't have the time or energy or willpower to go through banging their head on the wall long enough to actually get those things up and running inside their data center. And with DCOS, because it's literally just one command line, one click, it gave them the freedom to go do that. There's no hesitancy. You can install it and uninstall it in the course of an hour, and just get a chance to see it and test it and play with it. Link down there to actually go and see this white paper with the sort of details. I'm just giving you the highlights because I think the numbers are pretty bad. All right. So now this is our big data / IoT demo, and I will just prove to you that I'm going to give you the link to it and everything. So give me a second. I'm going to walk you through what's there. I'm actually not going to go through the whole demo here because it's relatively long to set all this up, but it's available to you. What I'm going to show you are some of the highlights of DCOS in my demo, but if you want to come up afterwards and talk about any of the details, don't be shy. So we took a pile of data from the city of Chicago, a bunch of crime data over the course of, I think it's about 6 months. It's basically all the crime that happened in the city of Chicago. And we created a little application that sort of recreates the generation of that crime data back into a time series so that we can actually play with it. We're running that through Kafka into Spark, then we're splitting it out into a database so we can see sort of a real-time look at what that data looks like. So how is that data pouring in? How can I actually see it? We use Grafana, but you could use whatever your favorite visualizer is. That's not really the interesting piece of it. And then we also ported out into a data store where we could take a look at it in a heat map. So we can see, okay, how does this actually look then when we take the time out of it? So, as I said, this demo, you can walk through it. It's actually really easy to see step by step how to put this all together. And I think it's pretty relevant. As I said before, I'm not a big data guy, so I do this demo pretty frequently, and I like it. But it also shows a bunch of different technologies running on DCOS. I told you before, you can run Kubernetes, you can run Kafka, you can run Spark, you can run Influx, you can run Grafana, you can run Nginx, you can run all these things in a single cluster. And so that's what makes the demo interesting for me as well, is I can just showcase a lot of the different kinds of technologies that you can run inside that single cluster. So, as I said, so up until last week, when people would say, great, I want to try this, I would say, awesome, let me connect you to my sales guy who's going to get you a preview of DCOS. Now I can say, just go download it from DCOS.io. We have, and actually I'm going to show you, we have tutorials for running this in your favorite cloud or on-prem. So if you go to install, you'll see all the different sort of areas, and this list is going to continue to grow, where you can get DCOS up and running for free right now in your favorite cluster. We're also working with some of these providers to make it so that you have even free testing clusters. We don't have that actually running yet, but if you're one of those folks that says, boy, I'd love to have a free testing cluster, reach out to me afterwards. As soon as that becomes available, I'll be happy to make sure you get access to one of them. But the reality is, we're talking about 4 node clusters usually as the sort of minimum to get DCOS up and running, so it's not that expensive. It's $10 an hour or something like that. So if you click through here, you'll get all the awesome instructions. So it talks about system requirements, shows you how to actually get it up and running. Step by step, super easy. Hundreds of people are doing this a day now, which is great, so we think it's pretty good. Don't mind this tool. This is the tool that we use for actually spinning up clusters inside Mesosphere because we do it so often. So when you start DCOS for the first time, after you get it installed, I'm not going to go through the install process because really the time in the install process is actually getting the nodes running. It's not the installation of DCOS. So it's provisioning the nodes that takes the longest. Once you get it up and running, this is where you go first. It's your master node. I'm just going to sign in with Google because that's how I always sign in. And there we go. This is my cluster. So this is the dashboard. It's pretty boring right now because there's actually nothing happening inside my cluster. But this gives you a sense of all of the resources that I was talking about before that DCOS is managing. So you can see the CPU and the memory. Eventually, this will include a bunch of other different kinds of resources. So we're adding in support for GPUs, we're adding in support for networks, etc. So this is going to continue to grow as we add in additional kinds of resources. I'm going to show you the universe first, and then I'm going to go back and point out a few other things. The universe is our repository of these frameworks and services that you can add into DCOS. So this is the thing I was talking about before, the easy one-click way to add in your favorite framework. These ones at the top we call selected because we spend a lot of time to make sure that we like them a lot. We're not going to call them certified just yet because we don't have a certification program. But these are the ones that we use on a regular basis, and frankly, the ones that we know customers are putting into productive use. If I scroll down, you'll see what we're calling community packages for now. And these are all the ones that have been submitted by anybody. This is an open project, so not only is the open source available, but the actual access to the universe is available as well. We're putting together a program, like I said, of certification, open certification, to make sure that it's clear sort of which ones are trusted and which ones are not. But for now, if you have a great idea or a great package, you can come in, get it up and running, get it actually into the universe and make it available to all your friends. Let's see, let's start with Kafka. Actually, no, hold on. I'm going to go into system. So the universe itself actually has multiple repositories. This ability to point to different places to go find the packages that go in the universe. The reason this is cool is because if, for instance, you're the government and you're not allowed to attach computers to a network, you can have your own private repository. Or if you're Microsoft, for instance, and you want to use DCOS to run their Azure Container Service, which they do, they can point off to a set of packages that are specific for Azure Container Service. So this ability to sort of have this extensible set of repositories makes sense. I'm just removing the one that's the one for internally that we use for DCOS, the test one. So that when I go back to the universe, I'm just getting the ones that you will get when you install. Okay, so I clicked install Kafka, I clicked install, and it's done. So what's happened here? Kafka has been installed into DCOS. It's now running as a service inside Marathon. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to click on Marathon. I mentioned before, who's here familiar with Marathon? A few people. So Marathon is this thing that understands how to run things for a long time, how to keep them up. It's a container orchestrator, for those of you that know what that means. So when I say, hey, get Kafka up and running, Marathon says, no problem. I'm going to get it up and running. I'm going to keep it up and running. It gets listed in this list of applications. It's still deploying. It'll take about a minute and a half, I think, to actually get fully deployed. But as soon as it's deployed, then we'll be able to run any application we want to use Kafka to the interface. We can scale it up, scale it down, all that, using this interface. Now, some of you are saying, I hate GUIs. Where's my command line? Okay, no problem. I've got you satisfied as well. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to click down here at the bottom. I'm going to say install the CLI. So our CLI is a separate package. It uses an API to communicate from your laptop back to the your data center. I'm just going to copy this command. This is what you will do as well. This is going to install the CLI for me. This is going to actually make it so that it's attached to my data center. You can see it has the URL of my data center in the command there. Makes it super easy for people to actually get this up and running.
So does it install Zookeeper and then you also?
It installed Zookeeper into the actual data center, yes. So part of that installation process is to take all 30 of those packages and get them running across however many nodes you have. Like I said, I waved my hand at that part only because the provisioning of those servers can take 7, 10, 15 minutes, just depends on how many servers you have. This cluster has 7 servers, I think, and I'll show you what they look like in a second. I think it took maybe 10 minutes to actually get up and running. So I probably could have done that at the beginning and just shown it to you later, but yeah. As soon as you follow those commands inside the tutorial and actually get it installed, it installs all 30 of those things, it gets them up and running. I'll actually show you that in just a second. Let me just say yes to this. Okay, great. I've got the CLI installed now. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second, but let me answer that question first. Yeah, this is a 7-node cluster. So those are all the nodes in my cluster. I can actually drill into these individual nodes. I can see what's happening inside them. I can see where the faults are. So if I really want to, I still have full control over each individual server. It's not as though we're saying, no, you can't touch them anymore. But the real power of this is not necessarily having to go in and do it when you don't want to. If I go back up to well, I can see all the different components. This is where you see all those different individual pieces that have been installed. You can see what the help is. You can drill into each of these as well and see how they're running, see where they're running. Okay, let me jump back here. There's one more thing I have to do. So you have to log in. You saw me log in. You saw me log in before. I have to log in with the CLI as well. This is going to give me my opt token. With this opt token, then the CLI would be. All right. Now, let's see what's running. Look at that. It's only Kafka. Okay, that makes sense, right? So Kafka is the only thing that I've installed so far. Let's jump back to the GUI real quick and just see what the health of it is. It should be fully installed by now. So it should be done deploying. And there it is. It's running. That's good. Just that easy. So let's install Spark as well. Everybody has Spark. I'll do that through the command line. Single command to install Spark. Again, I'm not telling it where to install Spark. I'm not getting it running on an individual machine or having to pay attention to where it's running it. I let DCOS do that hard work. One of the things that's interesting about the CLI as well is it's extensible. So you'll notice that every time I install one of these packages, it doesn't just install the actual application into my data center, it actually also installs the additional commands that I need for that package or for that framework. So now I can do DCOS Spark run and it'll run my Spark job, or I can do DCOS Kafka broker add and it'll add a broker to my Kafka instance. So that ability to control it both through the GUI and through the CLI is a core component, we think, of what makes these modern data centers. Okay, if I jump back here, then you'll see Spark is deploying itself. Spark takes a little bit longer than Kafka, so we'll give that a second. And like I said, of course, you still have access to see what's actually happening inside these machines. And as they go down, if one of these machines was to go down, you'd see it's down. You'd see it spreading the load across the other machines. You'd have the ability to go in and bring up a new machine to take its place. Same thing with individual containers. As you see individual pieces of the system go down, it'll bring them back up. It'll show you where it's bringing it back up.
A quick question.
Yeah.
You mentioned adding the broker to Kafka.
Yeah.
How do you do that, and how, for your example, how do you control replication for some of these pieces of software that are going to be replicated?
So with the new version of Kafka, they've taken out the need to add brokers. That's kind of a bad example, actually. So you can add tasks though. You can add other things. So let me go in here. So I can use these commands then inside here. I can actually do that inside the GUI as well. So if I want to say topic, this will give me the ability to create topics, delete topics. So all of this can be scripted, of course, or you can do it sort of on. Yeah.
Can you explain a bit more of the magic, how it knows? So you have a heterogeneous cluster, and the same machine that uses Kafka, lots of disk space, you might not want to use for Spark or Cassandra.
Yeah.
How is it known where to use Cassandra versus Kafka, two different market profiles?
Right. So most of that is tuning the framework itself, right? So the frameworks have to know what kind of resources they need. They have to be able to tell Mesos, frankly, what they need and how they need it. And then Mesos does the hard work of actually combining them in the right way to make it the most efficient as possible. So it's a good combination of the two things. This is where you get that whole notion of two-level scheduling, right? You have each framework understands what it needs and how to schedule its own stuff, and Mesos understands how to put that then into the entire set of resources that it has within the data center. And the two things have to talk to each other. So when you build the frameworks for DCOS or for Mesos in general, you set them up so that they tell them that.
I can understand that within Spark, you have jobs that come and go. Okay, jobs that come up, short of things can go, you put Kafka, and you kind of want it to be on somewhere from start to the next 2 years.
Yeah.
You don't want to move it around after a month and realize, hey,
Well,
this workload is not quite as anticipated.
Well, but I think what you really want, though, is you want to be able to say, I want to reserve this amount of resource for Kafka to make sure that it always has this amount of space. And if it takes more, maybe sometimes that's okay. And if, sometimes it needs more for something else, maybe that's okay by a little bit. So I think what we've seen, at least with the customers that we work with, is that it's far more important for them to be able to get that guaranteed resource as opposed to necessarily saying where that resource comes from. And this gives them the ability also to expand out into hybrid scenarios that, I really don't want to have to manage that scenario by hand. I really want a system that's going to know when I need to scale out into a cloud when I don't. Yeah.
A follow-up on that, is there a way to specify in that green button you can launch it? Is there a way to specify in that flow how much CPU you can how much?
Yeah. Yeah. So if I come back here, go back to my universe. So there's always the advanced installation. So for each of the individual packages, you can do what you would normally do in the command line with all of those different options you can specify. Kafka is not a very good example, actually. Let me show you Spark. It's actually far more interesting. So all the different sort of things that you can specify, you can either do it through the GUI or through the command line. It's the same result. Yeah.
So how do you configure the startup configuration of your DCOS? Like how many instances you want to start with, what CPUs?
Yeah. So again, this goes back. So it depends on a couple different things. It depends on where you're going to actually run it. So which cloud you're going to use, whether you're going to try and run it on-prem, totally up to you. As I said in that previous layer slide, you could use Chef, you could use Puppet, you could use. There's a lot of different tools you can use for actually getting this up and running. We don't specify which one you should choose.
Let's say, like, for hypothetical, you want to run on Amazon. So
Yep.
how do you say, I want my startup configuration to be this?
So in the simplest case, all you have to do is say, I want X number of master nodes, I want X number of agent nodes, and it does all the rest of the sort of default configuration for you. If you want to get more detailed than that, you can go into the actual configuration JSON file and make all the changes that you want. But I recommend you go look at the tutorial that's out there on DCOS.io because it goes through it step by step. Yeah.
And then how do you do governance of resources, the one that you're explaining, that you want to filter, you want to limit the amount of users sparking with versus
Yeah. So that's,
Cassandra or any other?
yeah, that's all done through this startup, so through the installation process. So when you create your Kafka instance, you tell it, okay, this is the kind of resources I expect for this.
So you can't change it like after the fact that you're already.
You can, but usually what that means is you're going to just tear one down and bring another one up, right? And shift your workload over between those two different frameworks. So it's usually not a matter of actually changing the one that you have running, and that's okay, but that's usually the recommended way to do it. Okay, a couple more quick things. I just want to show you. When you install DCOS, the open source version, you can invite other folks to come in and monkey with your cluster. So I highly recommend it. You can use this, just type in an email address. They will get an email inviting them to come into your cluster. They'll have the ability then to come in and play around with the same stuff that you can. Makes it really easy for you to get an entire team of folks to actually come in and start using the same cluster. They'll get the same interface. They'll be able to download the same CLI. They'll get the same sort of level of control. Now, that's for the open source version. It just means everybody's an admin in the open source version until you go in and physically lock it down. That's okay. With the enterprise version, of course, we offer a lot more sort of special features in terms of how you can handle LDAP control and role-based control, et cetera. But, like I said, come in, get started, give it a try. Yeah, it is one of them. So, if I come back to Marathon. So, within Marathon, this is how you can spin up your own containers. So, if you've got a container sitting out in some Docker Hub somewhere that you want to actually get running, no problem. Spin it up here. You can also spin it up with a command, of course, in the command line. What this actually produces is a JSON file. This JSON file then is what you actually use for on the command line. You say, take all these parameters, use that then to launch my Docker container. If you're familiar with Docker and the Docker run command, you'll be very familiar with this JSON file. It's all the same freaking parameters. Just set up in a JSON file, makes it easier for us. You can save this off, makes it easier for you to have sort of that repeatability of getting these things up and running without having to remember everything that goes into that one long command. So that's containers. Okay, and I'm almost out of time. So, okay, a couple more quick things. I showed you DCOS.io. I showed you the product. I showed you the universe. And you're all really excited about the universe. So the whole reason I'm here. The whole reason I'm doing this is because we want to get more people to come and participate in this DCOS community that we've created. And specifically, we want people that aren't necessarily in the prime community that we're in already. So we're doing outreach to big data community. I'm not a big data guy. Did I mention that? Yeah, I think I did. So I'm not a big data guy, but we really want the big data perspective as we start to build out DCOS so that the operating system itself can actually meet all of the challenges that you have. We think it can. We want you to come and help us make sure that it does as we continue to build it out. So GitHub, if you want to write code. Slack, if you just want to talk to the community about what's happening. We've got channels on there for all different kinds of things, and that's where you can talk to the developers who are actually writing the code today. Mailing list if you're old school like me, and you want to stay in touch with something longer than a Slack. But please come take a look at this. It's available through the website. If you just go to the community page, you'll see all these links. You can get involved. Yeah.
Where is the place to find like a user guide or we have a case study where they show that this is how it helps the business to solve problems?
Yeah, so on launch day, we launched with 30 blog posts from different companies talking about how they were using it to solve problems. We gave those 60 companies I talked about early access to DCOS and to the repo. They took it and did crazy things with it, and then they wrote blog posts about that on launch day. So Autodesk was one of them, but we've got 29 others. So if you go to DCOS.io/blogs, I think I'll send it out to everybody. You can see a whole list of those things, or if you send me an email, I'll send you all the links. But it's pretty fantastic. Accenture wrote a really good one about how they were using it. A handful of the package developers wrote blogs about how they were putting it to use. So there is a fair amount of momentum in that direction, but you'll get more. So over the next 6 months, we're going to build a lot of this.
You actually write a book about it.
Yes, and we are. Don't worry. Not me personally, but somebody on my team. Busy slaving away on it. Other questions, thoughts? Everybody's going to go join this freaking community now, right? Please. If I don't get at least 20 new users, I get slapped. So, yeah.
If you're spinning up this cluster of AWS codes you can put in there to use, get that network set up in a particular way for Mesos to use it, or is it just like everything you talk to one another? Yeah,
So that's the default configuration, is everything can talk to one another. We have some customers that are doing far more complex things than that. I'm not a networking guy either. Okay. So, but I can point you to people internally at Mesosphere that are doing that. If you're interested in talking to them about it, they'll say, "Great, let's have a chat on Slack." And yes, it is designed to do both. In the default case, everything talks to everything. In the more complex case, you get to configure yourself. Yeah.
Is it safe to say machines in plan for DCOS are all the time? Or is it okay? Does DCOS kind of need to like have one machine, start with apps on there outside of DCOS?
So technically you can, but then you voided your warranty, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen if you do that. So like I would tell you not to do it, but technically, of course, you can SSH in and have fun, right? So there's nothing that prevents it.
The intention is that you know the machine is
That's the intention. Yeah, and primarily because remember, this is designed to run on clusters of like tens and hundreds of nodes. Like this isn't designed to run on like 2-node cluster where you may want to run a bunch of other things, right? Like this is designed to be something where I'm dedicating this data center to solving this problem.
DCOS should provide all the monitoring stats that you want. You're not going to need some other systems to get on there.
Yeah, so there is work happening in the community around that in particular. So there's a lot of different perspectives, let's say, on that topic. So the concept is to make that as pluggable as possible. So we're hoping that we don't have to necessarily make a decision. Yeah. Sorry.
What are some of the other differences between the enterprise and the
Okay, good. So imagine you're a Fortune 1000 company. What are the kinds of things that you need before you can go into production? You need things like compliance, right? So compliance is not part of the open source project because if you're just going to run this in your open source data center, who cares about compliance? But if you're JP Morgan Chase, you care a lot about compliance. There's some advanced security things. I talked a little bit about the RBAC and the access control stuff. So if you go to mesosphere.com, there's a really intricate list of all the wonderful things that are part of that product. I'm not going to spend time on it today, just because I want to really pimp the open source stuff. But go to mesosphere.com if you really want to see the delta in gory detail. I will say this. DCOS.io is designed to run a data center in production. So there's nothing that we've left out of it. The only difference is those checkboxes the Fortune 1019 CIO is going to need.
So checking the resources available or not available.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so Zookeeper is managing the systems and managing, the leader election within the masters, et cetera. That work is separate from managing the resources. The resources themselves are managed by Mesos and the Mesos. So Zookeeper is a piece of it, but it's not actually doing the heavy lifting, I would say. That's really working.
You mentioned this, the projects in umbrella, open source projects. You mentioned Mesos, Marathon.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some of the other ones?
Let's look, shall we? So if you go to GitHub, so inside github.com/DCOS, you'll see all the projects that are not Apache projects. So the Apache projects still live under Apache, and that's great. We want them to live there. But all the ones that were not Apache projects now we put under this new DCOS core inside GitHub. So feel free. Knock yourself out. Yeah.
How many machines are dedicated for DCOS itself? How many roles?
So yeah, so there's two different roles. There's the master and the agent. The masters you can do 1, 3, or 5. So you really only need one if you're going to be running a small cluster. So and you don't really need high availability. And then from there, the agents are all the same. So they don't have to be the same physically, but they're all the same just in terms of what's running on them and how they get treated by DCOS. So there's no separating those out into sort of separate things or specializing. When we get to GPU support, that'll be a little bit different. So we'll have the ability to recognize machines that have GPU support and sort of offer that up as a separate resource. But if you think about it just in terms of, like I said, pooling all the resources, it's really no different. DCOS itself is always just going to put it where it thinks it belongs best, and it can, yeah, and as I said, it can go hybrid as well. So we have, and that's part of why we open source the build toolchain, because we want those crazy environments. Now, I will say there's a lot of sort of, it's not perfect yet. So it works, but if you try and get it running out of the box, you may require a little magic right now. But we've got the support to be able to make it happen, and we're putting out more docs to show how to make that possible.
Can you scale up and down the whole cluster?
Yeah, yeah, both in terms of, as I said before, in
New
terms of,
instances.
I'm sorry?
Like in
The number of nodes?
Number of nodes.
Yeah.
Instances.
Yeah.
Can you talk briefly about the local development story or people launching DCOS on Vagrant, DCOS Vagrant project there, and running things like Kafka, Spark, and Cassandra, all within that?
In theory?
What's the story at?
In theory. So if you had like, the 30-pound laptop with like enough memory in it, yeah, go for it. Like, but I don't know anybody that's actually doing it.
Yeah, what's happening? How's it actually play out?
Well, so it literally comes down to memory, right? So if you have, and I forget what the number is, maybe it's 32, maybe it's 16, but it's somewhere in that ballpark, then you can get DCOS plus Kafka plus Spark plus Jenkins. That's kind of the package that we've been showcasing as being kind of a simple, prove it all works. Yeah. But I really don't even talk about it when I go out, because I don't want people to get frustrated. like it's just, this is designed to be a data center operating system. You really need to have a data center
Yeah, I guess
to
more
see
what
it.
I meant as, that's probably more of this question or anything else, but as we're developing an application that's going to be deployed into this thing.
Yeah.
It may depend on Kafka, Cassandra.
Yeah.
How do I develop that thing and get that? The idea that I'm developing everything on my laptop with DCOS running there, with those services there.
So as I said, that's possible.
Right.
And for the handful of people that I know of where that's a requirement, that's exactly what they do. They just go buy a big effing machine and they just do it on the big effing machine locally, and then they put it out in their dev cluster, and then they put it out in their cluster. We're working actually on finding a better way to solve that problem. And frankly, it has to do with us figuring out how we can make these services available as a pool, sort of, so that you don't have to run the frameworks themselves on your laptop. You can just run the piece of DCOS that you care about on your laptop and make the frameworks available someplace else. So that's, you know, it's one of those things that we've talked with the community about that we're working on. And, you know, the whole CI/CD conversation is one that we're still in the early stages of. We've got Jenkins, and we use Jenkins internally, and we use it. I can show you how we use those technologies to do our own CI/CD pipeline. But, you know, are we where we want to be yet? Not yet. So.
The question I was
You can write it. You can do it, dude.
The other question was about the role of like Ansible and Chef, which briefly is technologies.
Yeah.
You have a push button version. How do those things work in practice?
Yeah. So we actually put out a chef cookbook, and we put out public scripts on launch day for DCOS. We want people that are familiar with those experiences to feel comfortable being able to deploy an entire data center using that with DCOS. So that piece of it is done. Now, the next part of your question, though, is you know, what does that mean in terms of how do I evolve? I want to install my next framework.
Yeah.
Should I be using those things, or should I just use this?
Right. Exactly.
And my advice is always use what you're familiar with, and I would I would continue to give that advice. So if you're new to this whole thing, I think we've got some of the easiest ways to do it. But if you're like, no, we're a Chef house or a Puppet house or an Ansible house or whatever, great, continue to do it, because the last thing we want to do is disrupt everything.
No reason you can't use Ansible deploy Kafka inside the COS.
No.
What do we do today?
No. Ansible wasn't one of the ones that we put out sort of a detailed instruction set on, but we're working with them on it, so it's just kind of. Yep.
That almost answered my question.
Uh-oh.
So I just did a big data class online, and now I need to do the project.
Yeah.
Is it unreasonable to use my 20 gigabyte RAM Mac at home, or should I fire up something on EC2 for this?
20 is going to be right on the edge. So what are you going to run? Spark?
Hadoop,
Hadoop,
Hive, and Big.
It's right on the edge. So my recommendation is not to do it on your laptop, only because, as I said, you'll get into situations where it'll just turn into massive frustration. And we're there to support you. So if you want to try it, great. We'd love to help you and figure out what those corner cases are.
So I'd be better off using the free developer time at EC2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You need to learn that anyway.
Yes. And use our tutorials online to make that happen. It's all.
Can you show how to join another node, scale up and down?
To scale up the nodes, it's complicated. So I'm not going to show it here.
Can you show how to scale up a Kafka? Or
Yeah. Yeah, the nodes, I mean, and this is something that frankly we need to make. It goes back to the problem I said before about the whole reason I didn't install from the beginning is because the time it takes to actually get from, hey, I want to do this thing, to actually seeing the result of it is so long that it's just bad right now. But if I go into Kafka, for instance, no, sorry. Okay. So this will allow me to add additional instances of any of these applications, right? So I can scale this up, I can scale it down, I can add as many as I want, I can kill the ones that I don't want anymore. You can also set this up to happen automatically as things grow. So people use this all the time for web servers. If there's massive traffic, just scale.
Yeah,
So
not only for any.
Yeah, and again, I like to show it through the GUI because it's easy, but you feel free to use it.
Why did you have to get your token for the web UI?
Sorry, say again?
The token for the CLI, why did you have to go to the browser?
Yeah, it's a good question. We can set these things up so that they'll use so that I can give it a token rather than having it give me a token. But out of the box, that's not the experience you're going to get. You're going to get the experience I just showed you.
If I get the token that's persistent for the entire life, or
Yes,
it's forever?
yes, for this cluster, yes.
Until the cluster is alive, like
That's
oh,
If we have time for one more question.
Yes, I need my beer. I think I heard it. Uh-oh,
I have one question. So do you guys have a Kubernetes package?
the guy in the Mesos shirt in the back.
Yeah.
Oh, danger, danger. Yes, we have a Kubernetes package.
For DCOS?
Yep, for DCOS, yep. Now, when we revved to 1.7, which is the one we just came out with, the Kubernetes package hasn't revved yet to 1.7. So if you go and look in the universe today, it's not there, but it will be soon. And this is one of those areas where we really want to challenge the community because we are not Kubernetes experts. And so we spent a lot of time, frankly, building a Kubernetes framework. And we're hoping that part of this whole open source project is that we can find some Kubernetes experts to come in and help us make that thing really kick ass. Even with the last version, like I said, it worked. I use it in the demo all the time. It's part of the demo. I think it's an interesting piece to show how you can use different orchestrators for different problems. But it's not one of those things that I would say is production ready yet. So look for the new rev of it though soon. And if you're interested, let me know and I'll point you to the folks that are internally, as I mentioned, that are part of that project that can bring you in. We'd love to get more help.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Aaron, for
Sorry. Yes. Happy to. Yes, I will provide you with the demo.
Okay. So I'll post the demo online and you can see the video as well. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.
thank you.